Today we're looking at some NHL trade rumors, mostly focusing on the New York Rangers. Now that they've been eliminated from the 24-team NHL playoffs, there's a lot of talk about the future of some of their top guys, including the fact that if they were to win the draft lottery, would they actually consider trading the first overall pick? We'll discuss all that coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned today, we're taking a look at some trade rumors around the New York Rangers and discussing the upcoming Phase 2 of the NHL Draft Lottery. Today we're looking at another article from Larry Brooks of the New York Post discussing the future of a lot of these players who are likely not going to be with the Rangers moving forward or need new contracts but could find themselves traded. Like many NHL teams, the New York Rangers are going to have their fair share of difficult decisions this year because of the flat salary cap, and some of these players were, obviously could be determined to either be signed or traded. But let's kick things off with the future of goaltender Henrik Lundqvist. Now, Larry Brooks believes that the future of Henrik Lundqvist is not with the New York Rangers, that he has played his last game and he will not be back next year, that the goaltending tandem moving forward will be youngsters Igor Shesterkin and Alexander Georgiev. Now, there was a lot of talk that Georgiev could have been traded near the NHL trade deadline, but this article explains the fact that the Rangers really didn't get a ton of interest and there really wasn't a whole lot of conversations taking place. And not that they were even really shopping him per se. I think it's fair to say the Rangers probably had a few inquiries, people kicking tires, but nothing really overly serious. And it sounds like to me that they never really were all that interested in trading him anyhow. I think it's time to move on from Hank. Obviously, that $8.5 million cap hit is going to be a major obstacle to keep some other players in the fold, and it just doesn't make sense for them to keep that if they can find a way to move on, even though he's been, one of their top goaltenders of all time, and certainly have had a great run here with the organization. But like I said, they have a lot of other contracts to look after, and that cap hit, even though it's only one more year, it's a major issue for them moving forward. So he feels that for another team to acquire Lundqvist, even with a 50% salary retention, that it's going to be nearly impossible for the Rangers to find a fit where they could actually pull off that kind of trade. And I do somewhat agree with that, but I do think there's a few teams out there that would consider that. However, one part that really complicates things is the fact that he has a full no trade clause. Obviously, Henrik Lundqvist is going to want to continue playing. He's made that perfectly clear that he wants to not only play out next year to finish his contract, but he feels he can go beyond that. Now, that's what he said publicly. What he feels privately is, possibly could be different. And I think obviously one thing that keeps driving him here is the fact that he hasn't won the Stanley Cup. Like many NHL players, that's their goal, that's their dream. And until they accomplish that, they have a hard time hanging him up and moving on, accepting the fact that it's not going to happen or has not happened as of yet, which I completely understand. But obviously, like I said, if he has control over where he's going to go in a trade, he's likely not going to accept a trade to a team he doesn't feel really has a legitimate shot at contending and getting him that elusive Stanley Cup. And he also may not want to accept the fact that he could become a full-time relegated backup goaltender. That's a strong possibility. He might prefer to be in a position where he at least has a chance to be the starter, or maybe in a 1A, 1B type of scenario where he can play, maybe even 40, 45 games of the season. Something like that where he can kind of reassure himself that he can have a bigger role on the team. So obviously that kind of gives all the control to Henrik Lundqvist and not the team. And if they can't pull off that kind of trade, a buyout certainly is possible. Now, looking at the capfriendly.com website, analyzing how the buyout would work, which I'll give you a quick snippet here on the screen, Lundqvist's contract buyout would save them $3 million next year. However, it would add on some dead cap space for one more year after that at 1.5. So with $3 million savings for next year would go a long ways, but obviously, he makes but obviously has a cap hit of 8.5, so they're not going to rid themselves completely of that. Now, if they were to do a trade at 50% retention, which is a max you can do, then that leaves them with a cap hit of $4.25 million. So we're looking at just over $1 million difference between doing a trade with 50% or a buyout. The only problem is the buyout adds on some dead cap space for the year after, which is not really a favorable situation, but they're going to have to make a decision here what they prefer. Do they need the cap space now, or can they do without it for next year? Either way, it's not an ideal situation, but they've signed some big-time contracts for some of their forwards, like Panarin and Kreider. You've got some other guys like Zibanejad's not that far away from being eligible for a new contract, and with the way he's played and performed with the 40-plus goals and how much he's improved, he's going to be looking for a big-time raise as well. Probably something not too far off from what Panarin's Lindgren's making, especially where he's a center iceman and plays top 6 minutes, oftentimes the number 1 role. So clearly that's going to be expensive for them to retain. And they're obviously, like I said, they're going to have a lot of other younger guys coming out of their entry-level contracts. Some are coming out now, whereas you have some over the next 1 or 2 years. So it only makes too much sense that they need to find a way to move on from Lundqvist. So if he doesn't accept a trade with 50% retention, they buy him out. He can be a UFA, and he can go on and sign with wherever he can find himself an opportunity that'll be completely in his court, and the Rangers will have their hands washed of it, and they'll be done, moved on, take the cap savings, and try to move on with the rest of their team here. Now, when it comes to the other members of the team that they're looking to retain or possibly trade, you're looking at defenseman Tony Deangelo, who's again a restricted free agent defenseman. He had another solid regular season. Didn't have a very good playoff series, though. Many of these guys did not help themselves with their performance in his 3-game series with the Hurricanes this year in the playoffs to get themselves to the next contract. Deangelo often looked really silly from the defensive side of the puck here on multiple occasions. Didn't really produce a lot offensively either, so didn't really do themselves any favor. And you can't help but wonder, with the way the blue line is structured right now, an expensive contract for a guy like Jacob Trouba. You got Adam Fox coming up, who's going to be getting a big raise coming out of his ELC if he continues to play the way he did this year. That maybe a guy like Deangelo would be expendable. I would think that they'd probably prefer not to do that. They do have some older guys on the team like Brendan Smith and Mark Stahl, who's not going to be there too much longer. So obviously they're going to need younger guys. They have Ryan Lindgren as well, who's not making a lot of money, who's really improved and taking on a role with the team as well. They have a guy like Keandre Miller as a prospect who could play a role in this team in the near future as well. So clearly they have a lot of tough decisions. Deangelo is a player likely going to be looking for some pretty good money, though, considering the offensive production he's had over the last 2 years. He was able to get by last year with a cheap contract. The Rangers saved a lot of money because he didn't have arbitration rights, so that really kind of put him in a corner where he had to accept what they were offering. But now he does have that, and it's going to cost him more money to keep him in the fold. So there's certainly some question marks whether Deangelo gets signed, or if he's looking for just too much money, they might not have a choice but to trade him, and there would not be any lack of options, I don't think. I think he's a solid young offensive defenseman. He certainly has his things to work on defensively, but many teams would be patient in that regard, I do believe. Another player who's a questionable future with the Rangers is forward Jesper, who's certainly a popular teammate, good role player. He's been with the organization for some time, but it might be hard for them to sign. He's an unrestricted free agent, and Brooks believes in his latest article here that he very likely does depart through free agency. Not that they wouldn't want to keep him. I think they very much would want to, but given the circumstances, might be hard to do. Now, if they can find a way to rid themselves of Lundqvist's contract, maybe there's a chance Jesper could stay. It's possible. Far from a guarantee, though. And the other tie that we're looking at as well is Ryan Strome. I mean, Strome didn't really have a great playoff series either. He's certainly usually the number 2 center on the Rangers organization behind Zibanejad. Has got a chance to play with Panarin a fair bit as well, which certainly, fair to say, probably has inflated his numbers a bit, but he had a really solid year. And many feel that the Rangers are probably reluctant to commit too long-term and too much money to him going forward. Obviously, they believe in a guy like Philip Hedl who could come along and be that number 2 center in the not-too-distant future. And they might want to prefer to sign the restricted free agent center to maybe a 1-year contract, maybe a 2-year deal at most. Obviously, it's going to depend on when he becomes a UFA and all that. He's not far from being eligible to be a UFA now, so a short-term deal could have them be at risk to lose him through free agency for nothing in a couple of years' time, depending on what he does for a contract. But at the same time, like I said, I'm just not sure that they're going to be wanting to commit a lot of money there, based on the fact that, as well, like I said, with Zibanejad's contract coming up in the not-too-distant future, you've already got Kreider and Panarin to big-time deals that you signed in the last year. That doesn't leave a lot of money for guys like Strohm to really get paid and get a long-term commitment. So it is quite a possibility that Ryan Strome, even though he's fit nicely with the Rangers, could very well find himself on the move here yet again. Of course, he started with the Islanders, he went to the Oilers, ended up with the Rangers. Overall kind of bounced around, had some decent moments with both teams that he played with previously, but has been probably his best hockey's been played as a blue shirt in New York. So we'll see what happens. But he also had way better line mates as well, and that's certainly a major point I think we should all consider when analyzing his overall performance. Now, the other part of this article I found very interesting was Brooks' commentary on the 2020 NHL Draft Lottery Phase 2 that's now coming up Monday, August the 10th at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. We got confirmation of that today. We already had confirmation before between the qualifying round and the playoff round for round 1 being started. That's when it would take place. And we get an announcement today that it's the 10th at 6 p.m. Eastern time. So stay tuned. There will be a live stream on the channel where I will be watching and reacting to that. And I'd love to have as many of you join me as possible so we can find out together. It's going to be very interesting who wins. There's lots of good teams that are going to be in that draft lottery, and the Rangers certainly will be one of them. But he goes on to talk about the fact that where the Rangers have a lot of long-term deals for players on the wing already, and they have some other solid prospect wingers in the system already, that they would probably prefer, if they were to have a high draft pick, to get a center iceman like a Quinton Byfield, which could allow them to move on from Ryan Strome sooner than later as well. And at the same time, if you move Byfield into the organization, you have Hedel there. They could be, along with Zibanejad, your 1, 2, 3 longer term, or at least for the next few years. That would certainly be an interesting proposition that maybe, as much as they like Lafreniere, he wouldn't be the best prospect for their organization given the deep prospect pool that they've accumulated over the last number of years. So if the Rangers had more luck in the draft lottery like they had last year, where they picked 2nd overall and got Kaapo Kakko, would they consider trading that pick to another team who really wants Lafreniere? Maybe there's other teams in the top 5, like Detroit, like Ottawa, who might be willing to talk trade here, where they could move down to make sure they get Byfield and get something else in return for swapping places. I mean, it might be a good move for the Rangers. I mean, it's hard to say, though. If you look at the prospects in this draft and you take a look at the talent level amongst all of them, many feel that Lafreniere is kind of like up here and Byfield is about here, and then there's a bit of a drop-off until you get to the other guys like Stützle, Rossley, Drysdale, and all the other ones that are going to likely be in your top 4, 5, 6, 7 picks. And if that's the case, maybe it would be best for the Rangers. I mean, if they get Quinton Byfield and another asset, it's certainly not a bad haul considering that they were in the playoff qualifying round here, and they're certainly on the the upswing coming out of the rebuild and becoming a playoff contender. So interesting concept. We'll see what happens. Of course, it's not something we really need to give serious thought to unless the Rangers actually win the draft lottery, because we know that if they don't, they're going to be picking much lower and they wouldn't really have a shot at Lafreniere or Byfield. And they also have an extra first-round pick coming by way of Carolina that they obtained in the Brady Shea trade, which will be the lower of the picks that Carolina has, because they have multiple first-round picks as well. So they're going to have at least 2 first-rounders this year. So they're going to have some wiggle room and ability to make some trades, or maybe try to move up or down in the draft anyway. So the Rangers will be a team to watch at the draft with these RFAs that they might be looking to move, multiple first-round picks in their hand. I do expect that the Rangers, like I said, will be a very interesting and busy team to watch as we get to the 2020 NHL Draft, which is likely going to be sometime here once the Stanley Cup is awarded by early October, most likely is what we're looking at for a date. So let me know your thoughts on all of the things we talked about today, the future of some of these players with the blue shirts. If the Rangers won the first overall pick, would they trade it? Geez, let me know your thoughts down in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing, turning on your notifications so you don't miss any future content, and give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.